Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Political Power Ranker. Chris Berg here, Director of Political Coverage for Nexstar Affiliates. And joining me, as always, our man from Boston, Emerson College Polling Director, Spencer Kimball. Spencer, are you staying warm up there?
We're trying to, but the temperature is going to 0, which is awfully cold up here. But the polling will warm us up.
Kind of like Greenland this time of year because, they're in the news.
They are, and we're going to talk about Greenland today as well, because we got our first national poll of 2026.
Well, let's talk about it. First national poll. Some of these numbers you may recognize, but some are very interesting. So, Spence, what do we have here?
Well, first, I think it's important for us to understand that we've switched our methodology from registered voters now to likely voters. We're going into a campaign season, and what we didn't want is a switch in August, so we've done that switch now. And what you're going to see is a more partisan electorate here in our polling moving forward, stronger Republican Democratic turnout, because that's what we're expecting here in the midterms.
Terrific, good to know. And, most people would look at likely voters as a more accurate, more focused poll too. So we're getting the real deal here from you early on. So that's
Yeah,
awesome.
we're tightening it up early here in 2026.
Here we go. All right. So let's look at your national poll. First numbers up are President Trump's approval. Let's talk about that.
So we always start with the presidential approval, and what we see here is the disapproval continues to tick up for President Trump, and it's been going this direction since August. Every month or so, it's another point in the wrong direction if you're on the president's side. But the approval number actually ticked up this month 2 points. So President Trump has seen his approvals dropping while his disapprovals have been gaining. This is the first month that we've seen those approvals gaining along with the disapproval gaining a little bit. A slight change of what we've seen in the trajectory, and we'll see if that trend continues and he's able to reverse that slide that we've seen in the fall of 2025.
One quick question on that. This is one of the first polls I've seen where the approval numbers actually ticked up a little bit, a couple points. Why is that in your poll?
Well, what we see is, particularly with male voters, they still favor the president. They've got a 50-45 approval of the president, but also Hispanic voters. And we're going to talk about that later with Venezuela. It looks as if some of the president's policies has shifted that Hispanic vote, which was drifting away from the Republican and Trump, towards him a little bit more this time.
Excellent. And you know what? We've got a third person we want to bring into this discussion. He is Kirk Beto. He is the editor of the National Journal Hotline, joining us for the first time. Kirk, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, Chris. Hey, Spencer. Happy to be here with you guys talking Poland.
Awesome. Just give us a little bit about you so we know where you're coming from and how long you've been with the Journal Review and how'd you get there?
Hey, guys. I'm Kirk Bate. I'm the editor of National Journal's Hotline. It's a twice daily political newsletter where we cover campaigns 365 days of year. We cover competitive House races, Senate races, the early races for the president in 2028. Governor's races, state legislature. If there's a competitive race for dog catcher, Hotline is covering it. And these polls here are our bread and butter. This ad buys, money spending, where people are campaigning, what they're talking about in their ads. That's all we do here at Hotline. And I've been here for about 7 years now. I came up through local publications, got my start at the Nashville Tennessean, then worked at the Arizona Republic, USA Today. So I'm doing a little bit of politics and news here.
Awesome. Great to meet you for the first time. Thank you for joining us. Let's go back to that first slide and just get your reaction to what Spencer just presented us.
Well, Chris, I had the same question you did here, that this is one of the first polls where we've seen a slight uptick in Trump's approval ratings here. And this is one that we're laser focused here at Hotline as we start thinking about the midterms, because the two most important numbers we look for when we're trying to gauge how the midterms are going to play out is the president empowers approval rating and how people are feeling about the economy. Trump's approval ratings have been underwater since the first Liberation Day in April last year. And these presidential honeymoons, where the public has a little bit more of a sympathy for the president, are just getting shorter and shorter. Biden's approval ratings flipped in August of his first year, right shortly after the pullout from Afghanistan. What we're seeing with Trump here is it's even earlier, and he's been really struggling to recover from that.
And I'm not sure how much he cares, though, at this juncture. He's kind of laser focused on what he wants to accomplish. It's very interesting, very unusual when it comes to the to presidential view of approval ratings. But let's go to another slide because we got a lot to cover. That was great stuff, Kirk. Let's go back to Spencer. Spencer, what's your next slide?
Well, we got that congressional ballot test. So those approval ratings we'll talk about, where Trump is right now is similar to where he was in 2018. He was like a -10 going into the midterms. Right now we have him at the -8. We'll see if that number moves. And if we take a look at that congressional test, we can see here it's a +6 for the Democrats, which is a strong position to be in, particularly if you look back at our history of polling. You can see in 22 and 18, we had the winning side a little bit high on the winning side, but the trend was in the right direction, which suggests that the Democrats are in a good position to win back the House.
Kirk, I've got a lot of political reporters that I work with across our group in our country, in the country, and a couple of them have sent me some Republican polling that they've been doing, and a couple of them, these pollsters out there who are Republicans, have been describing what they're seeing out there as a bloodbath that's about to happen. What are you hearing and seeing?
Well, we said earlier that President Trump might not care about his approval ratings, but you know who does? Mike Johnson and John Thune, because those are the guys who are going to be on the ballot here coming up in November. And according to the Emerson poll that we're dissecting here, it looks like it's a bad situation for them to be in. The Republicans that I'm talking to are also starting to really sweat. You remember back in 2018 where the numbers were pretty similar during Trump's first midterm. Democrats flipped 44 seats on their way to flipping the House. They only need 3 seats this time to take the House and 4 in the Senate. If I'm a Democrat sitting here looking at this poll and seeing these headlines, I'm pretty happy heading into November.
Absolutely 100% accurate. Spence, let's keep on moving because we got more stuff to get to. We got another national poll, this one about fave, unfave, with a bunch of individuals.
So we took a look at kind of the president's cabinet and maybe his adversary here with Powell up there. And Jerome Powell is a very popular person in the country. 57% of Democrats favorable, 47% of independents, and even 37% of Republicans. So while he is the foe to Trump right now, he's very popular, and maybe he's not the best foe for Trump to be attacking.
Kirk,
what do you think?
I was really surprised at how popular Jerome Powell was. Obviously on this poll as well, we saw that he had 28% were unsure or never heard of. I mean, if you put Jerome Powell's picture in front of a lineup, I would be very surprised to see how many voters could pick him out. But 45% approval rating, I think that goes to show that when Trump starts attacking these career civil servants, that their approval rating goes up. It's kind of like an inverse of what Trump's approval rating is right now. And I wonder if there's any parallels almost between Dr. Anthony Fauci in the first term. I think we're going to need more polling to figure that out, but that's immediately jumped out to me.
He feels like much more of a mild-mannered person, even though he came out with a rebuke to Trump a couple Sundays ago. And especially with the video when Trump walked around the Fed under construction, it just felt like Powell was shrinking next to him as he kind of beat him up a little bit. I wonder if there's even a little bit of sympathy or empathy for him out there in the general public for that and his response the other day.
No, absolutely. I think that's definitely on the table here, especially as Trump ratchets up these attacks on him. And, the DOJ is investigating him and the Federal Reserve as well. I don't think this is going to be the last time we hear Jerome Powell be the target of Trump's ire.
One other name popped out at me just as his unfavorable was Scott Bessent. That he was the lowest behind, besides Powell, second lowest. And I'm just wondering if he does have a little bit more of a cross-party connection versus the other more MAGA members of the cabinet.
It does seem. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Spencer.
No, go ahead, Kirk.
I was just going to say, it does seem like he's been seen as a little bit more of the adult in the room with Trump. You saw that a lot during the first term about these cabinet officials who would keep Trump within the guardrails here. Maybe voters are looking at him as that role right now instead of someone like Rubio or Vance, who are tied at the 46% disapproval rating in this poll, that they see Bessent, who might not be thinking about 2028 presidential plans, as more of the adult in the room here in the cabinet.
Spence?
He's a fairly newer face to the American people, and so they're starting to learn who he is. It looks like the Trump administration is putting him more out front on a lot of these policies and issues. So it'll be interesting over the course of the next year or two to see if his numbers move and in what direction.
Yeah, I was just commenting on Greenland yesterday too, so which gets him in more in the quagmire, if you will. All right, ICE, and it's not the weather ICE. It's the law enforcement arm of the immigration side of the Department of Homeland Security. Spencer, what do you have here?
Well, we have the ICE activities underwater, not ICE itself. We asked about what they're doing, and that's 5738. And it's not popular with Democrats, nor is it popular with independents. It's popular within the Republican circle. But again, when we start looking at the midterm elections, you're going to have to win over the independents unless you're trying to bring out the base at very high numbers. And this issue seems to be leaning again towards the Democrats.
Kirk, so what are the Republicans saying about the presentation, how ICE is presenting himself, and how can they turn that public perception to look at all these criminals that they're arresting versus all of the the U.S. citizens that are getting caught up in it and the other problems that they've had trying to do their job.
And that's the conversation Trump wants to have. He started that press conference on Tuesday, holding up the mugshots of the folks that ICE has detained in Minnesota during this immigration enforcement surge here. They're highlighting the worst of the worst. You know, Trump is literally holding up like it's almost like a cable crime show here, talking about how we got this guy who's accused of assault, this guy's accused of murder, this guy who's accused of going after children. They want to highlight that. That's what Republicans want to talk about, because by and large, voters are for enforcing immigration laws on the books and going after the worst of the worst. It's just what we're seeing in this massive surge in Minnesota right now is the pushback to that and these heavy-handed tactics. And Trump has acknowledged that he doesn't necessarily want to see these images of ICE agents raiding homes, raiding workplaces on TV. He rather highlight those worst of the worst. And that 76% approval rating you're seeing right there for the ICE activities in communities from Republicans is one of the big reasons you're not seeing more Senate Republicans forcefully push back on what's been going on in Minnesota and some of these more heavy-handed tactics, because their base is much more for them than independents or Democrats. Unfortunately for them, Democrats and independents also will go to the polls in November.
So go ahead, Spence.
I was going to say there's another angle in here with the gender divide, that the males are kind of split on this issue. It's like 46-49, but the females are definitely against it 2-1. So the female vote, which is a strong Democratic vote, and they vote at a higher propensity than the men, is another indication where they're going for 26.
And it's fascinating for me on this issue in particular is in the 2024 debates, I probably did 25 of them. And one I remember distinctly was the primary in Indiana. Mike Ron was in that amongst others, and who was a senator at the time. And one of the questions we asked was, are you going to support President Trump's efforts when it comes to immigration and enforcement as ICE and federal law enforcement come into your state? And they had basically a non-answer answer. They wouldn't get very specific. But my point to the question was, you knew this was coming. If you were going to enforce, to the letter of the law, immigration reform, and people have come to this country illegally, you're going to, arrest people who are just living their lives. And the media, and us included, are going to gravitate towards the emotional content, which is people getting pulled out of their cars, women crying because their husbands have left, which this is a big buildup to. This was very easy to see coming and anticipate a response to it. Thoughts?
Exactly. I was at the RNC in Milwaukee covering the convention, and they had signs handed out on the convention floor: mass deportations now. This is something that was coming. This is something that Trump campaigned on. He talked about getting the worst of the worst out. If you look even all the way back to 2015 when he launched his campaign, he launched it talking about how The immigrants coming from Mexico are, they're bringing drugs. They're not sending their best. They're emptying out the mental asylums. This has been a steady drumbeat for Trump for over 10 years now. It's just now that he's back in the White House, he has the tools to carry out this vision.
And it should be no surprise, except it's the videos, I think, that are driving the emotion and forming public opinion. And right or wrong, that's kind of where we're at in the society. It's whether you agree or not, it is what it is. We do have to take a quick break, though, where my producer's pinging me saying it's time to go. So Political Power Ranker, we'll be right back. We've got several more slides from Spencer and Kirk Beto from National Journal Review Hotline and his analysis. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to Political Power Ranker. Chris Berg, director of Nexstar Affiliates and their political coverage, along with Spencer Kimball, Emerson College Polling Director, and Kurt Beto, National Journal Hotline reporter and editor, joining us for the show. We're talking national politics. We just finished a whole segment about Donald Trump and ICE, but now we're going to drill down to a few foreign policy dynamics that are happening right in front of us right now. Spence, what do we have first?
Well, let's head over to Venezuela. That was a big activity that occurred over the last month, and we wanted to know how voters reacted to that event. And what you can see here is this is still underwater. It's about 6 points underwater, but it's more popular than most of Trump's policies, and the disapproval isn't over 50%. And when we talked about the president's approval rating ticking up a little bit, you can see that Hispanic voter, they like the Venezuela action and give it a positive review, as opposed to the black vote where they don't like what's going on down south. So we start breaking into those demographics, and you can see where the president is able to make some inroads back with his base. But again, it's a small movement, and we'll see what happens over time. With events like this, there's an initial reaction, but then we live the day-to-day experience, and we're going to see, if we go back to the war in Iraq, people rallied around that war in 2002, and George Bush was at a 71% approval rating, but by 2006, he was at like 39% approval. So opinions can shift quickly, but what we see here is that the Venezuela operation seems to have worked in bringing the Hispanics back over to the Trump camp,
which is needed in part of the coalition to help him become president. Kirk, what do you think of those numbers?
I thought the share of the black voters who disapprove of this was so interesting to me. Trump made significant, not as significant as he has with Hispanic voters this last cycle, but pretty significant inroads with black voters, especially in blue cities in this last election. To see that 72% disapprove of his actions in Venezuela is really interesting to me. And to Spencer's point here, this should be read almost as kind of like the starting gun here for this, what could be a prolonged presence in Venezuela. Trump came out a few weeks ago and said that we're going to be in charge of running the country, that we're going to be in charge of building up some of this oil infrastructure. And again, you got to remember that Trump rose to power as one of the rare Republicans who was against foreign intervention, was against the war in Afghanistan, against the war in Iraq, and now he's talking about nation building in Venezuela. It's hard to square his slogan of America first with America's first. I think it's going to be a real hard sell to his base and some of those more independent-minded voters if we end up with a big bogged-down quagmire in Venezuela.
I had the same thought on the African American vote or disapproval. And Spence, you pulled a number for me when I asked that same question yesterday.
Yes, and we were looking at black males and black females, and we do see almost a doubling. So the black males is about 25%, the females is down around 10, 11% on that approval. And that's where Trump did make some inroads, but not significantly enough. And it looks as if in that black community, that has gone back towards the Democrats in some strong ways in the off-year election that we see here in 2025. And we'll see in 2026 what the turnouts look like in some of these races. And really, starting in Texas, in that primary in early March to see if Crockett is able to get the black vote out at a strong enough rate to be able to take over and win that primary down there. So a lot of moving parts, but those demographics are going to be key in these midterm elections.
Let me ask Spence you this question, and Kirk jump in afterwards. So is there a correlation or causation when it comes to Hispanic voters? Venezuela, good. I'm getting rid of a dictator. Does that correlate to Mexico and taking care of cartels? And will that help him with Hispanic voters? I mean, how do I read this moving forward with other nations in our hemisphere?
Well, I think even just domestically with the Hispanic vote, ICE is a big issue for Hispanic voters. They don't like the ICE policies more so than the white voters. So he's kind of he lost some support with the Hispanic vote, in my opinion, because of some of the ICE actions. Now he's trying to win back that group through the Venezuela actions, but he still has the ICE actions that are going on that might deter some of those Hispanics. They might like them, but they might say, you know what, I'm not going to vote in this election. Or there might be a guardrail vote where they vote D just to balance off tickets. So it's very interesting to see where the Hispanic vote goes. But to me, that's the vote that's the most swingy vote in the country. The white and the black vote and even the Asian vote is a little bit more locked in. That Hispanic vote, we've seen some movement, and we'll see if it continues to move or if it doesn't come out and vote at all.
In Texas, Kirk, they're rolling the dice on the Hispanic vote with the redistricting. But your thoughts on what I brought up earlier in that?
They certainly are in Texas. And, there's talk that Florida might also redraw their lines as well here over the next few months. And I think that's where you're going to see the biggest impact of this Venezuela policy and this policy of interventionism in the Western Hemisphere. You think about those communities in and around in South Florida, in Miami. The last few cycles, Florida's been pretty reliably red. It's not too terribly long ago when Democrats ran the show down there. But one of the things that those Hispanic voters really value is a strong arm policy towards the communist dictators in these countries: Cuba, Venezuela, Colombia. Like, these are all places where there's a huge Hispanic immigrant community there. And one of the things that Marco Rubio, a Florida man himself, has really been pushing is either not out and out regime change, not in all instances, but tighter policies on Cuba, Venezuela, and Colombia. So we're going to see how that plays out here, especially as Ron DeSantis thinks about opening up those congressional lines in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. Very good point. All right, let's staying with foreign policy, Spencer. Greenland, which is mainly ice.
Yes, not as popular. Back up to the 50% where they don't support. They oppose the idea. You can see there's a big group that is undecided, but you're already over 50%. And then again, you're looking at Democrats and independents. They don't like the idea. Republicans are not as hot to this as they are to ICE, but they're still warm to the idea. We'll see where this one goes. But again, these are not popular policies, nor are they policies that Trump necessarily ran on that voters are now needing to move forward. The ICE policy, as Kirk mentioned, that was run on. We talked about mass deportations, if that was going to happen, what that would look like. Now we're talking about Greenland. It's a new conversation that we've been having, but we asked this question last year in February, and the numbers were tighter. So it's actually gone in the wrong direction for the Trump administration as far as people's openness to acquiring Greenland.
Kirk, we're recording this as Trump is speaking in Davos, where he made a comment this morning saying he would not use force in Greenland. But what do these numbers tell you?
What a world we live in, where Trump promising not to use troops against a NATO ally is big breaking news here. It's a real topsy-turvy world we're in right now. But what these numbers show me is that voters are not concerned about Greenland, and they don't understand why Trump is pushing this. This is not a priority for them. And every time he talks about Greenland, he's not talking about lowering prices. He's not talking about the rising costs in grocery stores. These are the issues he was elected on. I'm very curious. Next week, he's scheduled to do an economic-focused speech in Iowa, and that's supposed to be part of his more focused domestic travel during his second year in office. But as Trump is wont to do, I'm wondering how much he's going to veer off script and talk about Greenland, talk about strong arming these NATO countries into opening up negotiations for requiring Greenland. Meanwhile, if I'm a voter in Iowa, I'm wondering how this is going to help me when I'm a farmer trying to sell my soybeans to China, where it's been very difficult. And that's where some of these tariffs have hit the hardest.
And remember, Iowa's got the open Senate race and governor's race up there. And that's a state where the Democrats are trying to make some inroads back from what they've lost over since essentially the Obama administration. And we'll see what happens out there.
Absolutely. And I think Rob, just real quick here, I think Rob Sand, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, is one of the strongest statewide candidates Democrats have this cycle, and one to definitely keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And we will be there in force with Next Star reporters and debates for sure. This is the fastest half hour in television. We have to get going and wrap up, but we got one last thing. Spence, who's up, who's down this week? We got to make it quick. We got about 45 seconds.
All right. Well, I'll make it quick. Who's up is the Democratic congressional candidates. They see a +6. Historically, the side that we've had winning those polls has won the House. So they only need to win a couple of seats to take over. So we have the Democratic congressional candidates up.
And who's down?
ICE is down. They're not out, but they're down. The actions of ICE have caused a negative attitude towards the organization. However, I don't think people are looking to get rid of ICE. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the two parties handle what ICE is doing in their activities compared to the elimination and what people are going to talk about on the campaign trail.
Terrific. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Kirk Beto, editor, National Journal Hotline. I got that right this time. Appreciate you joining us. Great insight. And if you're looking to find where these polls are at, look for us on social media at Political Power Ranker, at P Power Ranker. You can't miss us. We appreciate you joining us. See you next week.